Alright, so we're going to take a tour of this machine. My machine is a Janome XL Pro 5124. It's almost 20 years old, but you can still do the same basic functions on any machine, so you should be able to use this information no matter what kind of machine you have. So here we'll start at the top. If you open up the top cover, you'll see all these parts here. This is the thread spool. You put the thread on there, obviously. There's a cap on the end. You put that on there, and that'll keep the thread in place. When you thread the machine, there's a little black knob there that the thread goes around. We will cover that a little bit more later in the video on threading. This is another part of the threading process called the thread arm, and when we get to the threading video, we'll look a little bit more at this. This is the tension dial. It adjusts the looseness or tightness of your stitches. I have always left mine at 4 and I've never found a reason to change it. You can experiment with yours if you like, but I never found it necessary to adjust. Bobbin winder. So this is the path that the thread takes to wind the bobbin, which we will talk more about in the threading video. But here it is so you can just see it. These are where all the presser feet are stored. I have a section on presser feet at the end of this video, so you can see there are several there, and we will talk about the ones you'll use the most. Stitch settings guide is very handy. You just flip up the top there and you'll see all the settings to use for a lot of different stitches. Well, some of the embroidery ones are up there that are really handy. Just take a minute to look at that on your machine. So here is a menu of all the stitches that you can use. I use 3 to 4 of these, and I have used all of them in the past, but some of them I just used because I wanted to know what they did and then decided that I didn't really need to use them. So we're going to cover the 4 to 5 that you'll use the most, and you can experiment with whatever is on your machine. Some of the embroidery ones are kind of fun, but we're not going to use them here. Your straight stitch you will use 90% of the time. It is the most basic construction stitch. A zigzag stitch is used for lots of different things. I only really use it for seam finishes and when I need to sew stretch fabrics because that zigzag allows for more stretch. Buttonhole is kind of self-explanatory. That is for when you do buttonholes, which we will do in this class. A blind hem is kind of a bonus that we're going to go over. It's pretty fun. It's used on suiting and formals a lot, and you can't see the stitches from the outside. Okay, let's go over the stitch settings real quick. You'll see those on the right side of your machine. Sewing speed, if you move that lever all the way to the left, it'll go really slow. If you move it all the way to the right, it'll go really fast. The only time I move it all the way to the right is when I'm winding a bobbin. Otherwise, I keep it to the left. Your stitch length determines the length of your stitches, obviously. For basic construction, I keep mine at 3 because that is standard manufacturing practice. Some home sewing patterns will say to put it at 2.5. I find that unnecessary. For a 4 length is a basting and gathering stitch, which we will do in this class. The needle position will move your needle to the left or the right. I find this handy when I'm working with zippers, and it'll also adjust the width of your zigzag stitch. The hand wheel moves the needle up and down by hand, which is good if you're turning corners or threading your machine. Stitch selector wheel will select stitches in the menu, and when you turn it, you'll see, well, on my machine, there's a little red mark that goes to each stitch then it shows that I've selected it, and that's how I select the stitches. And there's probably something similar on your machine. If you hold down this back stitch lever, the machine will start sewing backwards. This is for whenever you start a line of stitching and end a line of stitching, and that will secure the threads. And you just have to hold it down for maybe like a second or two. Alright, let's continue moving downward. Here is the needle, and we're going to talk about all the stuff around this needle. Thread guide, which we will look at more when we do the threading video. Presser foot keeps the fabric in place and guides it, and is absolutely necessary. Do not sew without a presser foot. Whenever you need to change your presser foot, you'll push this little black knob called the presser foot release. And that'll pop off that foot, and then you can just pop a new one back on. They just snap into place. The bobbin case is under here. This holds the bobbin and keeps the thread flowing through that part of the machine. To open the bobbin case, you'll slide that little release button to the right. Here are the seam guides. These are little measurements so that when you're sewing, you will run the edge of your fabric up against one of these, and that will determine the width of your seams, or of your seam allowance. I have my seam allowance at 1/2 of an inch because that is more of an industry standard. 3/8 of an inch is even better. Most home sewing patterns will tell you 5/8 of an inch, but I find that to be too much. So 1/2 inch is good. Alright, let's go over the presser feet we will use in this class. All-purpose foot will be used 90% of the time for everything. A zipper foot you will obviously use when you use a zipper. I also like to use it when I'm stitching close to the edge of something, like for a pillow or a flat-felled seam on jeans. Buttonhole foot is for buttonholes. And a blind hem foot is for sewing blind hems, obviously. So that is a quick rundown of all the parts of the machine and what their functions are. And in this next video, we will learn how to thread the machine and wind a bobbin.